Well, the word mainstream prohibits any alternative within its own definition. So trying to search for an alternative within mainstream is a bit of a futile exercise. I think when we talk about, there's a big misnomer perhaps about the fact that alternative films, so called, and again what is an alternative film? There are many kinds of, what is called content based films, issue based films, or art house cinema, or whatever you want to call it. I think the premise is that these films are not commercial inherently, and hence not entertaining inherently, because they deal with certain deeper, larger issues, which don't come under the sort of prescription of entertainment. And I think this is a big misnomer, and it's a tragedy that we have to classify films in this manner. Films are an expression not only of a director or a writer's creativity, but they're also an expression of the society in the moment in which those films are shot, are composed. And in some senses, they are anthropological documents and of great archival value, because 30 years on, when somebody wants to look at what life was like in India in 2013, he or she might be able to access it through the number of films that are made. And the tragedy of Indian cinema, unfortunately, is that we are a one-note film culture. We make permissible only one kind of cinema, one kind of film. From the national awards to the Goa IFFI, to the NFDC, to any forum in which cinema is celebrated, the only people you find getting the maximum amount of media and publicity, maximum amount of attention, unfortunately, are the film stars of Bollywood. This culture of over-emphasizing one kind of cinema and completely not mentioning any other kinds of cinema, such as the documentary films that are made, the brave documentary films of Anand Patwardhan, Rakesh Sharma, people like that who make the regional cinema of Kerala, of Bengal, of Tamil Nadu, of Karnataka, Assam, Manipur, Mizoram, marginal voices, people, filmmakers who are working in what are called the periphery of Indian cinema, and even anything alternative to commercial Hindi cinema, which either could be from Bombay, Delhi, Madras, Calcutta. All of these are swept under the common brushstroke of alternative cinema. And just by the fact that I've mentioned these number of diverse cinemas and the languages and the cultures that they represent, means that the diversity of this country is not being expressed cinematically, or is not being allowed to be expressed cinematically. And the reason perhaps for that is that because cinema has never been looked at as a cultural artifact in India. It's been looked at as a commercial enterprise. Government's only contact with cinema seems to be when they need to collect taxes, or when they need to export a Bollywood film star and an item number, which, by the way, is the most misogynistic expression of that we have at the moment. A Bollywood item number on cultural forums, so called, in order to export what is known as pop Indian culture. So the lack of respect for alternative filmmakers, the lack of respect for the filmmaker as an artist, the filmmaker as a provocateur, the filmmaker as a agent of social change, and a filmmaker who just simply wishes to entertain people but not in the commercial sense. That lack of respect, unfortunately, leads to a situation where alternative voices are smothered and the mainstream voice is given more volume than it deserves.
So, since you
And we have another problem here also, which is that our mainstream unfortunately is not very, our mainstream lacks courage. The reason I'm saying that is because our mainstream economics, the economics dictate that you must have a star in order to have a distributor, in order to have somebody to finance your film. I mean, that's the way it works, star, distributor, financier. But our film stars don't take any risks. Our film stars refuse to come in films which are of anything, I mean, they refuse to come in films in which they're shown as their age. Forget about social risks, forget about political risks. 40, 45-year-old men dancing with girls who are like 18 and 20, 25 and expecting that to carry on working. Luckily, the box office last year rejected some of those films, and maybe that's showing a sign of the maturing Indian audience. And maybe we will have a Charlize Theron taking on a Monsters Ball, or a Halle Berry, sorry, Monster and Halle Berry doing Monsters Ball, or a Leonardo DiCaprio equivalent. But these are solid actors, you know, they're actors in the solid sense of the word. Our film stars, a lot of them, most of them, unfortunately, can't really act. A lot of them can, but they don't really need to do too much acting in the kind of limited roles in which they have been cast. So for a filmmaker like me, when I write a movie script on Kashmir, for example, as I have done, I would give my eye tooth to cast a Shah Rukh Khan or a Saif Khan, but they won't do that role. And because they won't do that role, I can't get my film financed, and hence I have to do it guerrilla style on a very low budget, etc., which is the reason why it doesn't get released in India, which is the reason why I'm saying that the respect that comes out of alternatives does not come our way, does not come this way. And of course, the government is not, and the government, see, every country in the world, government gets involved in art. Every country in the world, even in India. Government has taken the sign of patronage, the baton of patronage, and is carrying it through. There's Sahitya Kala Academy, there's the Sangeet Natak Academy, there is Handloom Board of India, there is crafts subsidies, there are all kinds of subsidies. So why my campaign is, why is cinema, which is the most sort of expressionistic, the most vibrant form of artistic expression that we have today. It involves sound, music, sets, you know, camera and acting and performances and drama. It involves all of these various facets, and yet cinema is the only art form which not only is subject to a pre-censorship, which by the way restricts the art form in some senses, but also is the only art form which is not patronized by the government but just allowed market forces to control and run it. We have become a very intolerant society, and we continue to do so. And it's no surprise that the more prosperous a certain section of society gets, the less tolerant that very section gets of dissenting voices. So you have incidences where an MF Hussain, for instance, is not allowed to return. A Salman Rushdie is not allowed to appear even on an electronic chat at a literature festival. Taslima Nasreen is kicked out and sent back to Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. We have so many examples of intolerance, you know, intolerance towards artists. And time again, the government as a state abdicates its role as a law and order, protector of law and order, to mob violence, threats of mob violence, threats of so-called disturbance of law and order. So much so that the states of Tamil Nadu and Rajasthan went so far as to place a ban on film which was already passed by the censor board. Now, censor board is a statutory body which has been given the powers to pass censorships, to pass a film, a certificate on a film. Now, once they have done their due diligence and they have certified a film, that should be the end of the argument. In fact, Supreme Court has ruled in time and time again that nobody else has any jurisdiction, including state governments. But state governments misuse that. They continue to place censorship on films. In Punjab, for instance, what we just had, sorry, not Rajasthan. They continue, Tamil Nadu and Punjab have just done this. But the censor board has given a certificate, but the government itself, on a perceived threat of law and order, which is all nonsense, of course, because it's all political, highly political, on a perceived threat of law and order, have taken the unusual step of banning the film in their state. Now, with this kind of atmosphere, where the state itself is complicit in snuffing out voices of dissent, voices that are inconvenient, or the inconvenient truths that the films, you know, can throw up. In this kind of atmosphere, where do you begin? Because India is a country of 1 billion people, and you can have a billion dissenters. And somebody else is going to have a problem with the film. So the first thing we need to get sorted out is that whose jurisdiction are we under? Is it the state government's jurisdiction, or is it the central government's jurisdiction? What is the body that's allowed to certify these films? And a deeper question than that is that do films actually require any kind of censorship? And I don't mean by censorship, I don't mean certification. They're two different things altogether, right? Banning a film is censorship. Certifying it is giving it a certificate in order that inappropriate content is not accessible for children at an inappropriate time. Well, there is no process. Unfortunately, there is no process of self-distributing in India because there is no audience for that. And this is a tragedy. I released a film called Forest, which I thought was a very entertaining thriller with an animal in it. It had a leopard, and the film was sort of highlighting the issue of poaching in our national parks in the thriller format. And by all accounts, the film was very scary and effective. But it did not do anything on the box office because it was released by PVR, Directors Rare, and it stayed for about a week in most cinemas, and it was removed because there was no promotion, there was no activity. So I don't think there's any. I don't think on that you need to have, look, in today's day and age, you need to have a minimum of 3 to 4 crores to market your film. Whether you make your film for 1 crore, or you make it for 50 lakhs, or you make it for 10 crores. You need between 3 to 4 crores to market a film. Now, that's not going to happen, right? That's not going to happen with filmmakers like myself. Like, no one's going to be giving money to me, yes, go make a film in Kashmir without any stars, and we're going to, lay out the carpet for you. Well, there is a view that prevails, which I think only perhaps exists in India, is that commerce and substance don't go together. But this is totally incorrect. I think you can make an entertaining film, and especially in a country like India where there's a billion people, you will find a critical mass of people to be able to pay the amount of tickets for you to make back your money on that film. So in theory, the filmmakers are there, the audiences are there, because this same audience will download movies from America, will download movies from the net, will watch HBO series, we're talking about a certain urban, well-exposed audience, of which there are an increasing number now. College students, who relate perhaps more with Friends, or a series like, Game of Thrones or Boardwalk Empire, or one of these kind of American series, than they do with a Saas Bahu series, for example, or maybe both, right? But you have that. The audience is there, and the audience is only going to grow because it's a young country, and you're going to have more and more audiences. But what you don't have, unfortunately, in the middle, is the distribution that allows you to access that audience and bring that audience into the theatres. And the tragedy of this is that the commercial Hindi cinema distributors, their logic is different. The reason why it's not happening is because the logic is completely different. They want to make a 400% profit in the first 3 days of the film release. That profit you cannot make with a film without stars. Because this audience that I'm talking about is an audience that will keep coming and trickling into the theatre over a few weeks which means you have to keep the film in the theatres. So your cost of marketing is relatively much lower. If the film is good, it stays in the theatres, and week after week the audience just builds. The building of the audience model of distribution is not there in this country. This country is a hypodermic needle, one-shot audience. It has to be, you have a media blitz, marketing blitz, and in the first 3 days, you shouldn't just make back your money, you should make a profit. In fact, it's the only business model that I've ever heard of, which works on a 400% profit basis in the first 3 days. Because by the next weekend, if your film has not done that, then you're out. So in fact, it's a business model which is acting against the Bollywood commercial mold as well, in some senses. Because it's great for those films who make it, but if those films who don't, as we know there are more flops than there are hits, those films who don't don't have a second chance at building an audience after a while. Are we effectively using cinema to shape narratives of existence? No.
Resistance.
Yeah, resistance. No, we're not. Obviously not. We're using cinema to reinforce existing stereotypes in different shades, colors, sometimes outside the Sydney Opera House, sometimes outside the Eiffel Tower. Men and women dancing in, shorts is the most sort of, how do I say, the most vulgar expression of that impulse. Our cinema insists on a certain lightheadedness and a certain non-seriousness. People don't want to think when they come to a cinema in India. They want to switch off. They want to escape from their lives' drudgery. At least this is what we are told by the people who are distributing films and making those kind of films. So to start, there are different kinds of cinema, and that has its place and it's absolutely fine and it should be there, because there are people who go to the cinema to watch that. But what about all the others? So we don't have that other space, unfortunately. We haven't incubated that other space. The government, despite all the institutions I mentioned earlier, has not intervened successfully in creating those diverse voices. We don't have an Almodovar. We don't have a Inaritu. We don't have a Zhang Yimou. We don't have an Abbas Kiarostami. We have a lot of Bollywood directors who are pretty much churning out the same film in different molds. And then we have a lot of regional film directors and filmmakers who unfortunately have not been given the kind of state subsidy or support financial and in terms of respect, if you like, who have not been given that kind of support to be able to become the Almodovars of the next generation. So we don't have that. We simply, the reason I am mentioning all these foreigners should tell you more than anything else, because I, as an Indian film student, when I was trying to find mentors, we all try and find mentors to try and learn from, etc. And I looked around in the Indian landscape, and there was not a single filmmaker who inspired me who was presently working. Presently working, I mean about 10 years ago when I started making films, right? So I'm continuously looking at, like the last Indian filmmaker who really inspired me was Satyajit Ray. Me and of course, everyone else. But if you ask me who you want to work with, who would you tomorrow jump on a flight and go and work with, I would say I'd work with Peter Jackson, I'd work with Inaritu, I'd work with the Coen brothers, I'd work with Zhang Yimou, I'd work with Abbas Kiarostami or Mahmoud Baf, right? I'd work with Mike Leigh from America, from England, and Soderbergh, P.T. Anderson. See, I'm rattling off names of people who are not Indian. None of them are Indian. And it's ironic that in a country that makes the largest number of films every year, I cannot come up with one name of a filmmaker that I would like to work with, or work for rather. I'm of the school which says that if there's something wrong, then some filmmaker could come across and show what's going on. I come from that school, but unfortunately most of the cinema that comes out of the country, and I don't mean the regional cinema, what I'm talking about is the mainstream cinema, because since you asked me about mainstream, tends to be politically correct and tends to perpetrate and support the existing propaganda or hegemony or whatever you want to call it of the present establishment. That's why till today you've not had a single worthy critical film about Nehru. Till today you have not had a single worthy critical film about Indira Gandhi, who single-handedly destroyed the largest party that this country has known. She did a lot of good things as well, but mainly nobody has brought her to account cinematically. Nobody has shown that other side. We don't have a critical film about any of the institutions that we hold so holy, such as the bureaucracy, the army, the cops. I mean, if you look at cinema anywhere in the world, is replete with crime dramas which are very hard hitting and anti the sort of high-handedness of the establishment through the police system. We haven't had a single period film on the emergency. You know, who is going to tell the generations that are going to come about these stories, who are now willing? I mean, I myself, forget about the next generation, have consumed a lot of my history watching cinema. I know about Auschwitz. I know about the Second World War. I know battles in the Second World War in detail. I know about the American Civil War. I don't know about the Pacific Theatre, what happened over there with Japan, thanks to films like Letters from Iwo Jima and so on and so forth. But who in India is making a film about the Indo-China conflict, in which we were resoundingly thrashed and sent back? Who has made a film about the formation of Bangladesh, in which we had such a strong hand? Who has made a film about partition that criticizes or takes an alternative view? Who's made a film about the RSS training that went on, like Tamas, for example? Tamas was made 20 years ago, and it shows how the RSS were indoctrinated and they started causing the riots in Pakistan. And that was when India had one state channel, right? Now, who's made another movie about that whole episode? What is the right of, where does nationalistic Hinduism, Hindu nationalistic fervor come from? What is the source? So instead of these deeply engaging, critical, seminal films that should be made about understanding ourselves as a people, as a young nation, because we are only 60 years old as a democracy. Let's understand that. Right? I mean, who's made a film about Manusmriti, for example? Where does Indian man get his misogyny from? Who has explored that? Who has explored the idea of Ram as somebody who exploited his wife in many, many ways? You know, the alternative story of the Ramayana. Can anybody dare to make films like this in India? The difficulty, see Tamim, the difficulty here is that we are not an introspective culture. We don't have the capacity to laugh at ourselves, much less take criticism. We mistake debate for challenge of some sort of Indian nationalism. As if Indian nationalism is this sacred thing which you have to hold, and if anybody says anything against it, it's just going to shatter and break into pieces. This is the view of somebody who is very insecure. If you're secure within your own identity and in your own country, then you should be able to take criticism on your face and try and understand what that person is saying, and maybe develop a society in which these things don't happen anymore. So learn from history. But we don't even reflect our history, where we're going to learn from it.